Hello and welcome back for another AP Psych video. This is still part of Unit 6 on human development, and this lesson is on the transition to adolescence. So adolescence is a period between childhood and adulthood, and in the United States of America, we classify this usually around age 13 to age 22. It's the time of puberty and of kind of just growing up in general, but not yet becoming a full-fledged adult, despite the fact that you might pass over age 18. Not everyone in the world experiences adolescence. It does kind of depend on geographic location. Some societies expect a lot more of young people as they get to be age 14, 15, and 16. They might actually be entering to marriages, and not long after that, possibly parenthood. So those are normally associated with adulthood and not adolescence, although it is certainly possible. When we're looking at adolescence, one of the early topics is about physiological changes. And so there are growth spurts for both boys and girls. Girls typically encountering their growth spurts first, usually 2 years or so before boys. But we have a time of pubescence, which we're going to develop secondary sex characteristics. These are things like the deepening of a voice or body hair growth. Basically, secondary sex characteristics don't actually have to do with sexual reproduction, whereas a primary sex characteristic would, and that's more associated with puberty rather than pubescence. So speaking of puberty, this is actually the stage in which sexual functions reach maturity, marking adolescence truly beginning. And so for men and women in the United States, for boys and girls, I should say, for boys and girls in the United States, typically this is between the ages of 12 and 14, where they experience either the menarche or the spermarche. This is either the first ejaculation or the first menstruation. But girls and boys who are encountering puberty at early ages or later ages have often been studied by researchers among human development, trying to decide, what kind of effects does that actually have on kids if they are developing too slow compared to their peers, or if they are lagging behind their peers in development, or what about the kids who develop too fast? So generally, parents would call those kids my babies who are entering the adult world too soon. Females in particular, who develop and mature faster than their male counterparts, often begin wanting to associate with older girls, older females, who are going to more resemble their own image in terms of how they accept themselves and what they see in themselves in terms of body image. And so as a result, these females may actually begin certain behaviors that are more troublesome or riskier behaviors at earlier ages. These can include developing mental illnesses such as eating or feeding disorders or other psychological disorders, trying to maintain a certain image. Eating disorders prominently affect about 90% of cases are female. It could also be young girls who are deciding to begin having sex or possibly even get pregnant at an earlier age or exploring those things. And typically in general, boys and girls maturing faster are just more prone to more troublesome behavior, actually an increase in substance use, and then risky behaviors in general. Whereas those that lag behind their other peers, their counterparts, are often just as likely, whether it's actually early or older, to progress, may actually be subject to emotional difficulties, wondering like, why am I the only one that is not fully developed here or has not gone through puberty? I'm 17 years old, what's going on? Or if I'm 12 years old and I'm starting puberty and I'm leaving everyone in the dust, I'm developing. Those are things that get studied. One of the other things that develops over the course of adolescence, although not fully developing, is called the prefrontal cortex. So this is for neural development or brain development. It fully develops around age 25 to 26. But what it's responsible for in the frontal lobe is judgment, areas related to judgment and decision making, sometimes maturity. And so if you make poor choices, oftentimes you can blame the prefrontal cortex and say, well, it's not fully developed, so that's why maybe I participated in a risky behavior, or I didn't use or have proper judgment in this case. And so as a result, I'm blaming the prefrontal cortex. This is something that we see develop throughout adolescence and then even into adulthood to fully develop. So something to be familiar with. Also during this time, there is the search for identity. So from the previous video, you should have learned about Erik Erikson and particularly his fifth stage out of the 8-stage theory of psychosocial identity. That was called identity versus role confusion. He's not the only person to have ideas about our search for identity. In fact, there's another guy here who you should be familiar with. So his name is James Marcia, and he has 4 identity statuses that we're going to experience as aging adolescents and just aging human beings. And so those are diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement. And the basic idea is that nobody really starts off with an identity. You know, you're not born and then like, oh man, guess what? I'm religious. Or, you know, I'm 5 years old and I'm a Democrat and I support Bernie Sanders. Or, you know, there's all these viral videos on the internet with young children who are like chanting build the wall, they're hardcore Republican, or the liberal Bernie bro 5-year-old who's all about feeling the burn. That stuff doesn't really exist at that age. Those are people who are expressing the sentiment likely of their caregivers, their parents. And, you know, it does make sense. I mean, you're born, you care about surviving. You don't care about identity. And so you actually have this identity diffusion or apathy towards your identity. You're not committed to anything because you don't know about anything. Then you get a little bit older. Now you have expressed a premature commitment to identity, various roles and values that maybe are expressed from your caregivers, your parents, for example. So this is identity foreclosure. You know, if you were born into the Amish way of life, yeah, you're Amish, but you're not truly Amish when you're born because you haven't chosen that for yourself. That's just how your family is raising you. You might tell someone at 5 years old, hey, I'm Amish. And that's true. You are being raised in the Amish way of life, but is that really part of your identity yet? Or is that just how you're being raised so far? You get a little bit older. Now you have to start deciding, hey, do I like this Amish way of life? Or do I want to experience the other things that the world has to offer? And you actually get put into that position where you make the choice. And so you have a moratorium where you delay committing to the Amish way of life to experience the rest of the world. And then you go back to your family and you say, you know what? I want to stay with the Amish community. I want to be a part of that. That's what I like. Or you make the other choice and you leave all that stuff behind and you're going to get shunned and cut off from the Amish world and you join the non-Amish world. And so this is identity moratorium. You're delaying commitments to experiment, to figure out, how do I answer that question? Who am I? Where am I going in life? What am I going to do with my life? That kind of stuff. So that's identity moratorium. For adolescents, that's usually where it ends for a lot of people. Some people, even as adults, will struggle with the last step, identity achievement, where they have felt like, hey, I arrive at a sense of self. I know who I am. I know where I'm going in life. I know what I want to be. That's a hard thing for a lot of people to answer. You know, lots of people are going to struggle to truly figure out those questions and answers. And part of it is based on life experience, because you might think that, you know, I identify with this ideology and this ideology, but then you have a life experience that just flips that upside down. And you're like, oh, wow, you know what? Maybe I don't agree with that, or maybe I don't believe in that like I thought I did. And so the trends that you typically see are that identity moratorium and achievement end up increasing with age. So over time, there are more people who are figuring that out. Identity diffusion and foreclosure go down with age. So again, people who now don't have that apathy, or people who don't have that commitment to just, you know, their parents and their values, that tends to go down with age. Shifts back and forth are fairly common among some of the stages, but typically by late adolescence, there's still a lot of people that have not reached identity achievement. And even in adulthood, like I said, people will not always experience identity achievement in a permanent sense. So there's this time period that kind of falls between the last topic of videos and the next one that we're going to see on just purely adulthood changes. And this is called emerging adulthood. This is about a 7-year window, been proposed by a guy named Jeffrey Arnett. And the idea is, you're not really a full-fledged adult during this time, partly because you're getting older in adolescence and you're starting to realize just how difficult the transition to the adult world could be. If you go to high school and you finish, and you go to college and you finish that, you might graduate from college and realize, wow, I have no money. I'm not sure where I'm going to live. I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. that person is probably not then thinking, am I about to get married and also have a child? So emerging adulthood is kind of this overall period where people delay more adult-like decisions. Marriage is a fairly adult move. Parenthood should be an adult move. So they decide, maybe I'm going to stay in school longer. I don't know what's for me right now, so I'm going to just stay in school. And this is partly for being just aware and cognizant of the barriers that exist for your own financial independence. Okay, it's tough nowadays to get established on your own, way tougher than it used to be decades and decades ago, when college, for example, didn't cost near as much. And so part of the central features of this time period are kind of fluctuating between adolescence and adulthood, and experiencing some, but not quite everything, and focusing on yourself at that point in time in life, and trying to figure out and make sure you're really forming the correct identity for yourself, and you're putting yourself in a position to exceed when you become a full-fledged adult. So that is the period of emerging adulthood. But over the course of adolescence, one of the things that you will have likely encountered is various people, and also parenting styles especially, ways that people kind of treat you. And parenting styles is the easiest way to convey these. So these are Diana Baumrein's parenting styles. And there's many parenting styles. Neglect is one that's not really up there, but that kind of speaks for itself. These are three of the more popular parenting styles that often evolve around being the parent who's the dictator, the parent who's more of the friend and hands-off and just letting you do you kind of mentality, and then the parent who's more of a democratic listener and decision maker. And so, if you've had a authoritarian parent, if you ever heard this answer in regards to a question, well, because I said so. Okay, if that's the answer that you get, you have a dictatorish type of parent in that moment. So that's the authoritarian parent. What tends to happen with kids is they stop questioning authority because it gets met with that decision-making mentality, because I said so, very authoritarian, so they just stop questioning. When you have a permissive parenting style, children are more free to do as they please, which often leads to feelings of I'm used to getting my way. That makes someone very self-centered as they age, often then annoying, because they're not used to being challenged and they're not used to having boundaries. Everything has kind of operated around them. And this is a common parenting style to see if you are the product of a divorce type of family, where parents are kind of competing early on to get more affection and attention from their children. And so parents who might ease up so that the child shows a favoritism towards one parent over the other. I'm not saying it has to happen, but it is not uncommon among a divorced household. The most effective parenting style for producing a child with a great self-esteem and overall mentality is by far the authoritative parenting style, which makes you more of the democratic parent rather than the dictator or the friend. And so there are definitely boundaries and rules that are in place with this parenting style, but the parents or guardians can also be compromising and compassionate, which means they will take input from a child. They will hear them out. You'll have open dialogue back and forth, and the parent ultimately will still decide, but at least you feel like your voice was heard. Maybe there are certain issues that you raise and your parents thought, you know what, that's a pretty good idea. We can grant an exception to the rule in this moment or for that moment. And so that creates a healthy self-esteem, because you do challenge things that, are worthwhile to challenge, but you also comply when you are given certain boundaries. So that's actually going to do it for this video. If you're in my class, if you're one of my students, I'm going to actually have you read an article that looks at this question. So I'm just going to pose this to anyone who might be watching. But what is the perfect age? What's the magical age? If you had a pill that you could stop biological aging in its tracks, when would you take it? Is the perfect age at 18? Is it at 30? Is it at 40? You'll have to read the article and decide, but that's all I've got for you for now. So thanks for watching. Stay healthy as always, and I will see you next time. Adios.